to make sure you know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to be doing it over the next couple months. So first, I want to orientate the strategic planning. I love it. I believe in it 100%. There's research that supports it. I encourage you to take out your phones right now. It's the only time I'll encourage you to take out your phones to scan that QR code, because that is a research brief that we have written to help you understand why we approach strategic planning the way that we do. Most of it is, I think I heard Paul say it, implementation. You're about to do something that you didn't have to do. It's like, you can't just say that's a nice idea, then you're gonna have to go do it. So we wanna make sure something in this plan, because we're gonna do a plan, we're gonna work hard, we're gonna put a lot of resources in, a lot of time, a lot of thought into a plan. That is a document. That is not alone going to get us to make a difference for all of our students. It has to be a document that we can implement into the action planning, that we can take into our departments and divisions, that we can take into our schools, and we can take into our classrooms, and we can take throughout the community. So we want to structure it to make sure that it is something that we can take from a document and put into action. And that is a lot of how we at Hanover Research encourage districts to start thinking about strategic planning. If you don't have something you can grab hold on, if it's a bunch of fluff, how do we implement it? How do we do action? How do we then explain and start working with our 44 schools to start aligning to one goal on the district, right? That's a lot. So it matters how we do this plan. I really like this quote, strategic planning will help you fully uncover your available options. We want to understand where we're at and what are options. I know at this table we were talking about solution-based, asset-based. We got some problems, everybody does. How are we going to solve them? We're going to start looking at our available options, set priorities, and then define the methods to achieve them. And that is what we're going to do with our strategic planning. What's the process? So what's the road like? Many roads to California, it's one of my favorite sayings. But what we're going to be doing right now is behind the scenes, we are making sure that we get voice. We did that a lot with the Listening and Learning Tour. We are looking at our quantified metrics. Where are we at? What is our current state? So we're doing some research. You are going to be embarking in an organizational foundation review with your new Chief Equity Officer. That means that you're going to be looking at your vision, missions, and what this community believes. And that is going to be taking this place this year alongside the strategic planning process. In the end of September, so we are right here, the end of September, we're going to all get back together, this group, so you get to see our lovely faces again, and yourselves, and then we're going to dig in to creating the priorities and aims and the goals. That is the meat of the plan. We're going to take the current state, where we're at, look at our options, and then prioritize and make measurable, equitable goals for which to focus on for the next 5 years. That will be in September through November. So the end of September in our next meeting, we're going to dig into the aims. Then you're going to be able to look over the measurable goals that are developed from the aims that you identified you need to focus on. And we'll finalize those by the end of the fall. After the plan is approved by the board, that's when we get to our implementation stage. That's when we get busy. That's going to kick off in January. So we are going to be seeing and hearing all about this plan for a very long time that you're involved in. So thank you again for being in this room and your involvement. So I'm going to open it up for some quick questions, but first I wanted you to understand how we're going to structure this. Again, this is structured based on ability to implement. So we have our priorities that have been identified by the community. This was given to us by the voices of this community, students, staff, parents, community. And you're going to be developing aims. Aims are, what are these sub-priorities under these very big buckets, and what do we need to do? So that's going to be in late September. We're going to jump in. We're going to talk about aims, how do we identify them, but it's going to be breaking out We can't do everything all at once. Another one of my favorite quotes is, you can do everything, you just can't do it all at once. I learned that the hard way. Raise hands if anyone feels that's gotcha. So I try and do one thing at a time now. So we need to think about what are the most important things that we're going to do in the next 5 years under these priorities that sets a foundation for another continuous improvement strategic planning process in 5 years from now. So think of that as very big steps. We're going to be taking leaps, but we can't do everything all at once. And if we try, we go nowhere. And then we make measurable goals. And then the district's going to dig into what you say. You say, hey, this is an aim, we need to focus on this particular thing under culture and climate. And then the district says, I hear you. And they're going to look at the data and they're going to say, okay, from our historical data, we understand that we can get from here to here. It's attainable, but it's ambitious. And that's important because we want to make sure that we're all together on this and that we're motivated and engaged. And the research shows when we make measurable, SMART goals, that means that they're equitable and inclusive, that we are more engaged, we are more motivated, and guess what? We're 90% likely to hit our goals. So that is why we make sure that we make very strong, measurable goals, because then we can track our progress. So if it's not going right, because education is not a science, which means there's a little bit of art to it, which means we got to be flexible and pivot. So when we track measurable goals and it's not working, that's okay, because we're still learning and we can pivot and start to see what is working to affect progress in that area. And the action, well, that is going to be what we do for 5 years. We're going to be doing action planning, we're going to be doing steps, we're going to look at who's responsible, who's reporting out, who's doing what, at what time, what are the resource aligned, and then being able to communicate to the community all of it and what we're doing. And guess what? That's going to be where we see the progress. So I'm going to pause here and open it up for any questions about why we do this, what we're about to do, and the process that we're about to undertake. Okay, well, questions are always open at any time. You can interrupt me at any time. I'm open to it. I won't speak for my other co-facilitators, but if things come up, please let us know. What I do, oh, sorry, now it's working. I forgot for a moment that wasn't. Now I want to turn it back to you. What is your role in all of this? You have been invited to participate in this task force because of your experience, your knowledge, your role in the community, your passion. And so we want to make sure we understand what is our role? What are we supposed to be doing in and outside of these workshops? So to open it up, I'd love for you to call out nice and loud, because I think it will be hard for me to run around with the mic. What do you see your role being as a task force member of the strategic planning process?
I think that it's important for us to be the voice of the community in the individuals that we represent. Some of us are parents, some of us are former students, some of us are employers, some of us are, advocates for the community, but I think it's important for our experiences to inform this process.
So really advocating and bringing voice to the different positions and community groups that you represent. Anything else?
For me, it's the voice of a refugee and immigrants in the community, folks who are bilingual or new to the community.
Yeah, so making sure really adding identity and bringing that voice for others that have that in the community.
To align resources that can help us through this process, because we know that although we're thinking inside the system, we have to also connect it outside the system for it to achieve success. So
I love that.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, so some grounding and resources in and outside of the district.
A couple back here.
I was going to say voice as a partner, not just as a parent, but also because of my job working with parents, families, and children, making sure that I'm able to amplify what they're saying is important, making sure that's in the forefront. That should be my goal. And also as a mental health professional, working and continue to work with Worcester Public Schools when it comes to social emotional learning.
So I really liked that, one, amplifying voices, but also bringing in the knowledge and the organization and profession that you represent and adding that expertise into the discussions.
I think losing up. Kim, were you also going to say?
Hi. I think along those lines is also being sure to raise up bright spots or promising practices. I know those are catchphrases, but we often approach a strategic plan by, where we're not and what isn't necessarily working. And I would love a role of mine to also be able to spotlight things that are promising practices, whether they're in the district or in the community, that we can leverage and bring into the process.
I love that because it makes me think of what a leadership characteristic is, which is that solution base, that asset base of bringing in what we know works and saying, not just looking at those gaps, but that hope and positivity. Excellent.
So I feel my role is not only as a resource of WPI and STEM, but I'm also here as a learner, that I really appreciate learning more about my community here and how I personally and also WPI can support or be part of this.
Yeah, so learning from each other, and that is very much why we hope that you all get a chance to talk to everyone, because you are going to be learning from so many different perspectives of the community. Great point.
Just piggybacking on the learning, I look at one of my roles is to share what I'm learning about future focused schools, about what's coming in education, like AI and just different, this isn't different, but like the importance of project-based learning and the importance of student engagement, especially at the secondary level. And we've been to workshops and we've been doing a lot of reading on what is going to be necessary for the students entering kindergarten. It's a lot different than what it used to look like. So sharing what I've been learning.
I like that, sharing what I've been learning, and I heard that future focused. So we are, when a part of conversations like this, we are essentially planning how to get to the future for our students. So really being vision oriented, future orientated. And I saw one more hand up here. Yeah.
Say making others outside of this group aware of this task force and the work that it's doing.
Yes. Making others aware of this task force and what the conversations are in here. Absolutely. To be able to advocate and ensure that you are bringing here the voices and amplifying what others are looking for as we move forward. We've got to talk and inform them and say, hey, this really exciting stuff is happening. And these are the conversations that I've learned about. Excellent. And then we'll do this.
I was thinking about the learners. They're in our bullseye, they're our target. And so we have to make sure that that vision of a learner includes everybody in there. And, Tuyette mentioned something about immigrant students and making sure that we're including them in all of the work that we're doing, that whatever we're moving towards, that future focus has to include every child and every stakeholder in our district.
So beautiful, and just repeating what you said to make sure it was captured is inclusivity, making sure that everyone in all of the groups that represent our community is thought of and included as we talk about what our priorities and goals are going to be. It also made me think about how each one of us are coming from a different position. We represent different folks. Some of us are parents, as well as educators, as well as representing organizations. And so it's kind of this beautiful thing of like, we're parts of a wholesome, right? And figuring out how all of that looks like that. Back here.
I think support, once this process it's over,
we need to support the Worcester Public Schools in the implementation of the strategic plan.
I'm gonna snap to that. No,
Yeah,
snap,
so
yes.
it's not only their job, is the job of all of the organizations that are
Yes.
represented here, and hold ourselves and Worcester Public Schools accountable for that live document. The strategic plan is a live document, and we need to make sure that the Worcester Public Schools have the resources and the means to implement it. So it's advocacy, support, is accountability. I think that this is a 5 years commitment.
I love that so much. This is a 5-year commitment. Did you guys know that when you got invited here? But the ownership, the support, we're in this together. We're going to make this plan happen together, just like we wrote the plan together. And I heard again that leadership piece of creating a culture around a living document of what we found is most important. I see a hand here, and then I'll pass it over there, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, so from a perspective of a partner organization like ACE, I think the provision of primary data is really important because this is a strategic document for 5 years. We have to measure. So it is important to understand that we have primary data from these students we talk to every time. There are times we want to measure about, like, say, retention in school. Why are they dropping out of school, for example, right? They tell us the stories that they don't tell in the schools. So the way we compile these documents to inform their larger group is really, really important.
Collecting data from everywhere, in and out of schools, not just the numbers, but often what's behind those numbers. Yes, thank you. And we'll have our last comment here.
Sure, I just wanted to sort of bring forward what Yvonne, Mercedes said, especially in part. And around making sure that we actually capture visually immigrant, refugee, voice, but LGBT plus, Q plus community. So because they're, the sort of the students and they're part of the community, and so could we please capture that?
Can you also add another key thing is when we think about connecting our students and where they're at is also our SPED students. I think that is something that we have to really make sure that we are thinking inclusively with this process about supporting our students who have IEPs, who have 504s, and I think it has to be support from the teacher and the learner. We have to be thinking about it from both lenses around wrapping the services and support that we have to think about for all students, but I really want to make sure that we have that as a part of our conversation.
That inclusivity and equity, and part of the reasons why we make sure our goals are equitable and inclusive is to make sure that we don't forget any group, right? And I think we can take responsibility in our conversations and sit back and say, who are we not thinking of, or who's not represented at this table? Because it's impossible to have 100% representation of such a diverse community, right? So I really appreciate all of those comments. We will, again, capture what our role is in this. You put a high bar for yourself. Did you just see that? And we concur. You're an advocate, which you have already started to do very strongly. And you're going to inform that learner. You are going to be teaching as well as learning. And we want to make sure that we're talking to folks. We want to make sure that we're saying, this is what's occurring. This is what I learned. Did you know that we're doing this really well? Did you know that we have an opportunity for this? We want to talk to folks. What do you think? How do you think the direction is? What do you think about this conversation I just had in our task force conversation? And then being able to bring it back to this group and saying, I heard a story. I heard a voice. A student told me this. I actually got a challenging question about this. Can we talk about it? So it is a two-way conversation that we're going to be having as a member of a task force to make sure that we are being those advocates and representations of our community. Anybody else want to add anything before we jump into some of our reflection of strategic planning past?
the last thing I'll say is that part of strategic plans, the success of it, is being able to narrow our focus into tangible tasks that are clear. You know, maybe this is a reflection of past strategic plans that I've done. I've had like school committee drives where it's like 151 points, and I'm like, that can be done in like 10 years with a lot of money, but I'm not sure that's what you're looking to get out of this holistic perspective, process. I think the more clearer we can get as a group in terms of helping to define that is important, because you've got to be able to then communicate that back to the group. And there's a difference between, and I support sort of the data collection piece, but there's a difference between analyzing where our students are sort of academically, and then asking a more holistic question of where are our students at? Are they happy? Do you feel safe in school? Do you feel like you're challenged, right? Like those help us to define Worcester Public Schools at a distinction between sort of like US News that just pulls like these random data points and puts high schools on a ranking that has no real significance, right? Part of what districts have to get better at is defining who they are, creating data points for them to collect and showcase their uniqueness from a teacher perspective, from a learner perspective, and then using that as a guide to drive us in the direction of where we want to go, right? And that's a more holistic space for our students, for our teachers, for our families, in terms of not just feeling like we're successful academically, but holistically, whole body. I like going to work. I feel like I have a good partnership with my administrators. I feel like I have communication from my superintendent. You know, all those things are critical to a healthy ecosystem for public schools.
All right, you have done a great job at linking our role to our strategic planning reflection, so thank you. But what I really did love is this is part of defining who we are so that we know what direction that we want to go, and making sure that we do have clear and tangible ways so that we don't get too spread too thin. So I think some of that's going to come out as we start capturing our reflection of not just our current plan, but just our past experiences and strategic planning process. So if you're not quite sure or have not been involved in the last plan and your reflection in that, where have you been involved in strategic plan? What worked, what didn't? And that's going to help frame us of how do we orientate not just to our role, but to the actual work itself. What are the things that we need to be thinking of? How do we make contributions to the group as we start to structure the plan, you know? Because I think your point in that we can't do 150 points. We don't even have the resources to do that. So then, as a task force member, throwing out all of the things that I want to see done in my perfect world might not be the best approach for a strategic planning